no change in GDP. The ONS said output fell in each of services, production and construction. It was the first month-on-month contraction in GDP since July. For the 3 months to the end of October, there was no growth in GDP compared with the 3 months to the end of July. The pound fell on the foreign exchange markets on the news. Well, joining me this morning is Melissa Davies. She's chief economist at Redburn Atlantic. Melissa, welcome to you. Big surprise this. It looks like the services sector did most of the damage.
Yeah, it is disappointing data, unfortunately. So I suppose the silver lining is the economy is holding its head above water. Growth is zero in the 3 months to October, same as in the 3 months to September. And we do have some survey indications that actually the services sector picked up a little bit in November. So I think we can be optimistic that this contraction isn't going to continue, but it is a disappointing set of numbers for sure.
Obviously, October was exceptionally wet and windy. How much can we blame this on the weather, this outcome?
We can certainly attribute some of the weakness in construction to the weather, and yeah, generally there is a sort of special factor which you can't control the weather, so hopefully it won't continue. But the fundamentals going into next year are actually fairly positive in the sense that inflation is coming down, wage growth is still really robust, so actually we're going to have really quite strong real wage growth as we go into 2024, which should mean that retail spending, consumer services, etc., actually is fairly resilient next year.
Yeah, I mean, you touched just now on the fact that some of the survey data suggests a more positive outcome for November. But I mean, in terms of the fourth quarter as a whole now, we are going to have to see growth in November and December for Q4 to show growth.
Yeah, we will have to, and it's a difficult time. You know, we're at the peak of the rate cycle. We've had very high inflation, and I think we shouldn't expect too much from Q4. But as I said, that going into next year, the consumer does have that tailwind. It may not feel like it at the moment, but it is pretty robust real income growth that we're going to see, and we can hold on to that for next year.
I've seen a bit of commentary, Melissa, around in the market today suggesting this points to a shallow recession possibly this quarter and next. From what you're saying, I don't get the feeling you're on that side of the argument.
No, I mean, for sure, going into Q1, things should be picking up. So we're more of the view that we're stagnating now, with better momentum going into next year. So I think we've been plagued by the recession commentary, recession fears for a long time in the UK now, and we're sort of battling to stay flat. But actually, things should moderately look up going into next year.
All right, Melissa, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.
Now, the triple lock should be scrapped and future state pensions should be instead linked to earnings. That's the main recommendation this morning from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which has carried out a major review into the state pension system. Well, under the triple lock, which was introduced by the coalition government, the state pension rises each year by whichever is the highest out of inflation, average earnings growth, or 2.5%. But the IFS argues the arrangement is increasingly unaffordable and that scrapping the triple lock would save future governments £24 billion a year in today's money by 2050. Well, joining me now is one of the authors of the report, the IFS Associate Director, Jonathan Cribb. Jonathan, very good morning to you. I mean, the triple lock has massively reduced pensioner poverty. Why on earth would you scrap it?
The triple lock, while 1 year to the next seems like a sensible way of increasing the state pension, over the long run, it provides basically no guidance of how high the state pension is going to be. Broadly speaking, if we have good macroeconomic growth with earnings above inflation every year, like we did in the late 90s and up to the basically up to the Great Recession, the state pension won't rise relative to average earnings. But if we have a macroeconomic growth that looks like the last 5-7 years or so, we have this great volatility that ratchets up the level of the state pension in this unpredictable and admittedly costly way. We think that rather than obsessing over each year-to-year change and whether we keep the triple lock, whether we moderate the triple lock, or whether we find a different way of which measure of earnings we use. We think the government should have a clear target for how high, compared to average earnings, they think the state pension should be, just like they've done with the national living wage, legislate a path to meet that target. You can also then, once you're at that target, provide a protection against falling earnings by price indexation when earnings fall, just like they do in Australia.
You're suggesting that the state pension rises in line with earnings rather than inflation. But that would mean, on what we've seen for most of the last 3 years, the state pension would not be keeping track with inflation.
No, it would be. That's the point. So in the long run, we want this to hit an average, a fraction of average earnings. We're currently at 30% of average earnings. If you want it higher, you can choose to have a higher state pension at some cost. But implicit in our proposed 4-point pension guarantee is a guarantee that when earnings are lower than inflation, when inflation spikes, that the state pension will still rise in line with inflation in those periods, but then will continue to rise in line with inflation while the state pension gets back to its government-decided target.
Now, you've ruled out means testing the state pension, which will come as an awful lot of relief to a lot of people. Why have you come to that conclusion?
Means testing is where you would take away some state pension for higher income people. There's 2 reasons why we don't think that's a good idea. One is the state pension is a really fundamental part of almost everybody's incomes. Of course, it's more important for lower income and middle income people than for higher income people. But even for the highest income fifth of pensioners, it's worth 25% of their income. Taking that away would be, a big challenge to the retirement plans of these people. But most importantly, if you means test, you undermine the incentive for people to save in their private pension and would risk undermining the success of auto-enrollment that has massively boosted pension participation over the last 10 years.
Is the age at which the state pension becomes payable going to have to increase again?
Well, the age of the state pension age, that's the point you can claim your state pension, has risen considerably. We're now at 66. It was 65 for men, and it was 60 for women, and it's going to go to 70 in a couple of years. Go to 67 in a couple of years' time. We think that these increases in state pension age are a reasonable response to the challenges of an aging population caused by greater life expectancy, but that you should only be increasing the state pension age as longevity increases and not by the full amount. So if life expectancy rises by 2 years, we don't think that the state pension age should rise by as much. We also think it's really important to give more communication to people earlier on in their life about what they might expect their state pension age to be, and to give people a guarantee 10 years before they reach state pension age about what age they can receive it.
OK, yes, certainty is everything. Jonathan, good to see you this morning. Thank you. Some other business news stories for you now. And the chief executive of Entain, the betting and gaming group behind Ladbrokes and Coral, has stepped down with immediate effect. Jette Nygaard-Andersen had been leading the business, whose other brands include Sporting Bet, bwin and Gala Bingo for the last 3 years. Her departure comes just weeks after Entain paid a £585 million penalty to settle charges stemming from alleged bribery offences at its former Turkish unit that predated her time in charge. The UK's payments regulator has provisionally proposed a cap on cross-border interchange fees charged by MasterCard and Visa on transactions made between the UK and the EU's single market. The proposal from the payment systems regulator follows the end of review into interchange fees. Those are the fees paid by a merchant's bank to a card issuer's bank whenever a customer uses a credit or debit card to make a purchase from them. The review was launched after the UK left the EU and the EU's payments rules ceased to apply here. And the recruitment firm Impellam has agreed to a takeover by HeadFirst Global, an HR services platform based in the Netherlands. Impellam, which is majority owned by the former Conservative Party Deputy Chairman Lord Ashcroft, has been in talks with HeadFirst since July this year. Impellam, which employs more than 2,000 people and operates in 70 countries, is best known as the biggest supplier to the NHS of locum doctors and nurses. Well, as mentioned earlier, the pound fell on the FX markets following the disappointing GDP data. The pound currently trading at a third of 1% lower against the greenback, nearly roughly a fifth of 1% lower against the euro. The single currency, meanwhile, more or less unchanged right now against the greenback. On the equity markets, well, Wall Street enjoyed a strong session last night. The S&P 500 and the Dow both hit their highest closing levels since January last year, while the Nasdaq hit its highest close since March last year. That was followed by a mixed session overnight in the Asia-Pacific region. Shanghai was off by more than 1% after a major conference failed to produce more stimulus measures from Beijing. Well, in Europe, again, stocks are largely mixed. Actually, look at that. They're all in positive territory now. That's ahead of tonight's interest rate decision from the US Federal Reserve. It had been a bit tepid earlier on, I must say. Features today include Inditex. That's the owner, of course, of Zara. The shares have hit an all-time high in Madrid after the fashion retailer raised its profits forecast for the year. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is in positive territory right now, up just over 0.25%, helped by some of the big dollar earners. They always benefit when the pound falls. Entain is the leading gainer. The departure of its CEO has apparently been quite well received. While the specialty chemicals group Croda, it's benefiting this morning from a bit of recent broker comment. The share's 2% to the good there. To the downside, B&M European Retail is off by more than 6.25%. That's after the founding Aurora family sold a 2.8% stake in the company. Outside the FTSE, the ventilation product supplier Volution, you might recall we had the CEO on the programme fairly recently, it's up by more than 5% this morning following a trading update, while the aerospace and defence contractor Chemring has rallied by 2.75%. It fell yesterday on its results, which if you were watching this time yesterday, I remarked was quite surprising. As for the oil price, well, that suffered a sharp fall yesterday and it has continued to drift this morning. At one point, it fell below $73 a barrel for the first time since the 28th of June. Barrel of Brent crude currently changing hands at $73.19 a barrel. That's actually very, very slightly down on the session. Well, joining me now is Anna Boter, the head of economic research at Allianz Trade. Anna, good to see you this morning. Wall Street on an absolute tear right now. I mean, it's on course for a seventh consecutive week of gains. Now, we know that market expectations have repriced for an interest rate cut and the timing of it. Could tonight's Fed decision disrupt that thinking at all?
Well, no, I think we are on track with what we are expecting, meaning disinflation ongoing, even gaining track, if it's in the US, if it's in Europe, and now also in the UK. We are on track to see central banks holding on rates at their current level and starting to cut them somewhere in the summer of 2024. For the Fed, for example, we do expect the first move in June. And that's clearly 3 months before what we were expecting in September. So clearly we are now seeing that, of course, global risks of recession are still there. We do see economic activity slowing down. And clearly we do believe that central banks need to act because there are less pressures on inflation that we were feeling before, right? It doesn't mean everything is great. It does mean that we still have stickiness in the services sector. We still have stickiness from the job market. It takes some time to actually ease the constraints on the labor market. But still, if we look at the CPI reading last night in the US, we clearly see that it was on track with expectations. So we are now at 3.1. Clearly, it's not 2%, but we are steadily heading towards closer to 2% into 2024. So clearly that brings relief to the equity market. We do see the VIX, the volatility index, which is now at the post-pandemic low level. And we clearly expect the equity market still to post gains into 2024. Just to give you our forecast, we are tackling more like 5 to 6% performance into 2024 in the US, but it's relatively close when we talk on Europe or on the UK. And clearly that's okay following a double-digit performance this year, but still it's a relatively good performance, knowing that interest rates will be cut, but only progressively, right? So if we think about how much this cut could look like, we do see a maximum of 100 basis points in the US next year, but only 50 basis points in the Eurozone and only 50 basis points in the UK, or even less.
Okay, Anna, that's very clear. Thanks for that. I just want to get your reflections on the oil price. We're at a 6-month low right now. Is this all being driven by depressed demand expectations?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of that is just the global risks of recession that we see. Clearly, there are fears of oversupply, and I do believe that basically nobody buys in the cuts in production from OPEC. We do know that they will not be able to do so. We have some data coming out this afternoon on oil stocks, and I believe we will see upside risks there. And clearly, there are also some geopolitical games ongoing. Of course, Russia plays a key role here. But more or less, I would say that it's clearly demand-driven. And I think, again, to go back to the equity market performance and inflation or disinflation, since September, we are now at $20 per barrel lower oil prices. So if we know the calculations, this means at least 0.2 percentage points lower inflation. So it does mean that because of demand being lower and because of supply not being cut, we do see oil prices hovering around $80 to $85 per barrel into Q1 next year, but also over the whole year. So it's a good news in a way, because it does show that we should not have additional upside pressures on prices from oil as we used to have over the past 2 years.
Yeah, an early Christmas present for all of us. Anna, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Still to come here on Business Live, the cost of opening Europe's largest fine wine storage facility, its profits at Berry Brothers and Rudd. I'll be joined next by the Chief Executive. Don't go away.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Sla yemiyoruz. Sla better. Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. The cost of opening Europe's largest fine wine storage facility has hit profits at Berry Brothers and Rudd. The fine wine and spirits merchant today reported underlying earnings of £20.7 million for the year to the end of March. That was down 5% on the previous 12 months, but was despite sales rising during the year by 11% to £254.3 million. Well, joining me now is Emma Fox, the Chief Executive of Berry Brothers and Rudd. Emma, great to see you this morning. Sales were up. Were people spending more with you, or are you just attracting more customers?
Really. So we're continuing to grow our customers around the world, which is fantastic. I mean, we sell to nearly 100 customers, 100 countries around the world. And also, customers have just found more wines to buy from us, which is great, particularly around the en primeur campaigns on Bordeaux and Burgundy.
Well, quite. I mean, a lot of what you sell is en primeur. I mean, 2022 was, I think, in your own words, an exceptional vintage for Bordeaux. What about 2023?
Yeah, 2023, which we'll sell next year. We're hoping that will be a great campaign. The one that's coming up now, which it's interesting for a fine wine merchant like ourselves, our golden quarter is January, February, March, which is the Burgundy 2022 en primeur campaign. So that's we're just about to enter into that period of time, which, as I say, is our golden quarter in our industry.
Well, I need to start saving for that now then, by the sounds of it, Emma. What about your existing customers then? How have they been spending? Never mind the new ones. What about the existing ones?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really loyal customer base and they continue to spend with us year in, year out. Most of our customers collect wine with us, so they build cellars with us and they continue to build those over years. Because they're laying down wine that they're going to drink at a point in time. So we have this phenomenally, we're very lucky to have this great loyal customer base who continue to buy wines for their cellars.
What's the average spend per bottle right now?
If you were sort of taking what we call duty paid, it's sort of about £30 a bottle. So if you were going into our, taking the average of our what we call duty paid, it's about £30 a bottle, which is rising.
And is that down to inflation by and large? Is inflation still a factor?
There's a little bit of inflation in there, but the fine wine market is an interesting one because a lot of the wines are traded on the secondary market. And this year we've seen a drop in the prices on a lot of the sort of classic wines on the secondary market.
So tell me about the new storage facility in Hampshire. What's that going to enable you to do?
Well, we're absolutely thrilled about that. We opened it last year in Hampshire, as you say. It's got fantastic state-of-the-art storage facilities in terms of temperature and humidity controlled. We moved 8 million bottles. We only broke 4, which was some going. That was last summer. So we've got some real headroom to continue to add and build new collectors and new cellars for our customers.
Now, you've been quite busy on the acquisitions front recently. You've just bought a minority stake in Cotswold Distillery and a half share in the Hambledon wine estate. What was the thinking behind those transactions?
Yeah, we're at a really exciting time in this. We've been around 325 years now, and we're at a really exciting time in terms of looking forward to our, the next generations to sort of drive sustainable, profitable growth. And our acquisition plans are part of that. So we are, we've been looking and working with some fantastic businesses who grow and develop super premium brands. So whether that's the Cotswolds Whisky, whether that's Hambledon Vineyards, and indeed the Hambledon Vineyards acquisition, which just completed at the beginning of this month. That was a joint venture with the Symington family estate, who are a terrific partner for us. They know a lot about winemaking. This is our first foray into production in our long history. So we're really excited about that. It really helps for us drive a sort of real positive impact from a sustainability point of view as well.
Yes, a new vertical in the jargon, I think is what people would say. I mean, Emma, what about the whiskey side of things? I mean, traditionally, you were a very, very big player in whiskey. What proportion of the business does it account for these days?
So we were absolutely. So we used to own Cutty Sark, which was the biggest blended whiskey brand in the USA. So you're absolutely right. I mean, when I look at the total global sales, including our joint venture business with Hoteling, based out of San Francisco, our spirits account for about 30% of the business when you look at the total global turnover.
Okay, that's a very nice looking bottle just over your shoulder, Emma. What's in that?
Which one? The large one behind?
Yes.
Yes, that's our limited edition Good Ordinary Claret. So it's a limited edition for 325 year anniversary. So yeah, we have a different artist helps with a limited edition every year, and this one was for the 325 year anniversary.
Brilliant. Emma, good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining me. Got to leave it there. That's it from me for now. I'm going to be back in the city this afternoon. Thanks to all my colleagues in Westminster for putting up with me this morning. Do stay tuned. Coming up next, it's Prime Minister's Questions with Jane Secker. See you later.